What's up everyone, Kenji here, and in this video I thought I'd share 5 career paths in finance. Now I realized that quite a lot of people don't really seem to understand the differences between investment banking and trading or equity research and other sort of finance related roles. So in this video I'm gonna try my best to explain those and hopefully you can decide what's most suited to you. So the 5 that I've picked are financial planning and analysis, trading, investment banking, equity research, and financial audit. And I'll mainly be focusing on these roles for entry level as well as maybe 1-2 years down the line too. So I'll be discussing the work-life balance, the pay, as well as the skills required. And with that, I'm also going to provide examples of companies in each career path. And obviously this is just 5 positions, right? This is by no means a complete list, but if this video does well, I will consider making a part 2 covering some other things like what might be private banking, commercial banking, as well as quants and other things like that. I've also made a similar video on business career paths. If you want to check that out, I'll leave it in the description. But for now, let's jump into this one. So the first one's FP&A, which stands for Financial Planning and Analysis. And this basically has to do with forecasting and budgeting a company's finances. So things like, what will our revenue look like in 3 years' time? What about our net income? Or how much money should we allocate to the marketing team? How much should we pay our employees? Other things like that will typically be solved by the FP&A team. And I do want to clarify that FP&A isn't necessarily for finance companies. So Apple, say, or ExxonMobil, or any other large company really also has a finance team, right? And within it, it's probably going to have an FP&A team as well. And generally how it works is that the senior executives will come up with a macro level plan, like what might be, hey, reach 10 billion in revenue in 5 years time or something like that. And then the FP&A team is going to be in charge of actually implementing certain policies so that that can actually be achieved. And for this kind of a role, you can either get hired fresh out of college, like some of my friends have, or you can spend a couple years working, say at a Big Four or something like that, and then make the switch. For the skills required, it's mainly got to do with Excel work, so spreadsheets. Secondly, finance and accounting, obviously, as well as some strategy too, so you know where the company might be heading towards, right? As for the work hours, I'd say from 50 to 60 is more or less the average, so it's nothing, say, exaggerated. It is a good amount of work though. There's obviously some peak seasons, right? So typically when the year ends, that's when the account closes, and obviously you need to work slightly more during that period, right? As for the pay, it obviously varies depending on location, right? The thing with FP&A is that it's such a broad thing that it can either be, you can be working in FP&A at a local hotel, or you can be working in FP&A at Apple, right? Which is obviously gonna pay you a lot more. But I'd say a typical range in a big US city could be something like 60 to 90,000 US dollars. The second one has to do with that of a trader, which basically entails buying and selling securities. So these might be things like stocks and bonds, or more complex things like what might be options, futures, swaps, or other derivatives like that. Now, typically for the dynamics of this, it's either you trade your money or your company's money, or you can also trade on behalf of clients. Now, the job is known to be quite stressful, and that's mainly because you're dealing with money, right? And that money goes up just like it goes down sometimes, which can be very unpredictable and stressful for some people. Also, you're constantly measured on your performance, right? It's very obvious to tell if you're winning or losing money because all you have to do is look at your account. As for the hours, it's usually around 60 hours a week. Basically, the most intense hours are when the markets open. In the US, I believe that's around from 9 to 4:30. And before that and after that, you're basically gonna be planning, doing some research and getting ready for the market open time, right? Some of the big skills required for this kind of a role is being good with numbers, being really a fast thinker, fast decision maker in that sense, because you can win and lose money in just a couple seconds. And then thirdly, it has to do with being relatively unemotional, right? It's obviously going to help your decision making too. Also, you usually need a license to become a trader, and in the US at least, that's typically through the Series 7 exam. Now, most of the cases, the company that you're employed at will usually pay for the coursework as well as the test. As for the salary, it really varies hugely here. That's primarily because some people make tons of money, and through bonuses and other things like that, they might be able to really increase that, whilst others just don't make that much. Maybe they're not as good at trading, right? But I'd say a good estimate for the big financial cities is around $70,000 to $100,000. And some of the companies with entry-level trader roles include the investment banks, oil and gas companies, as well as the big asset managers like BlackRock or Vanguard as well. And I'll leave this article linked as well, where a trader basically goes through his day in the life if you're interested. Now the next path is investment banking, and this is definitely one of the most popular ones out there. So let me briefly explain what they do. And at its core, it's really two main things. Number one has to do with financing, which is basically raising money for companies. So for instance, that might be through stocks like Airbnb's recent IPO, or through bonds like Apple recently selling 14 billion worth of bonds, where the investment bank helps out in the process, right? Then on the other hand, you have what is called advisory, which basically has to do with advising companies on financially related matters, right? A common example here has to do with mergers and acquisitions. And an example of that happening in real life has to do with, say, Amazon buying MGM recently for around 8.5 billion. The job is highly deal oriented, which basically means that you have to work very long hours in order to meet the deadlines of those deals, right? And sometimes they can also be quite unpredictable. So I'd say an average week could be around the 80-hour mark, which is definitely a lot more than your average job, right? That said, you do get compensated quite a lot. Typically in a big US city, like say New York, you'd probably start with a base salary of around 85,000, and then the bonus, depending on performance, it is quite high. It can reach something like 50,000 or so in performance as well. As for the skills required for the job, it mainly has to do with financial accounting and corporate finance, and then on the computer side of things, Excel and PowerPoint. And then later on, as you move up the ranks, as you become a bit more senior, the ability to sell, being a good salesman, being a good presenter, obviously starts taking more of an importance as well. And I'll leave this resource linked in the description as well, which basically goes over the day in the life of an analyst. I did make a day in the life video myself as I was working at Goldman Sachs in their investment banking division as an intern. If you want to check that out, I'll leave it linked as well. The next role is equity research, and this one basically has to do with producing reports as well as recommendations on investment opportunities for clients. Now, I do realize that this does get a bit confusing in that within investment banks, there are equity research teams and there are also traders within an investment bank too. And the reality is that investment banks are so big nowadays that they actually have a lot of different divisions, some of which do overlap with some of the roles that I'm talking about here today. So I can understand why some people might get a bit confused on that. So apologies for that in advance. But at its core, equity research is about whether you should buy, hold, or sell a particular investment. Now, these investments could be stocks, which is the case most of the time, or it can also be bonds, funds, or other instruments like that. And here's an example of what that report might look like. This one's from Morgan Stanley's research team as they analyze Apple and give an estimate of a price target, right? And as you can take a look here, it is quite extensive, it is quite detailed. I mean, it's quite a long document. I'll leave it in the description just in case you're interested too, so you can take a closer look. I did find this one online for free on the internet, so you can definitely find a lot more too. As for the work hours, unlike investment banking, equity research isn't so deal oriented. So typically you do have quite a bit of a structure in that, say, you're given a set number of companies that you should be researching. And based on that, you're also obviously gonna know when each one's coming up with new financial statements and other things like that, right? So there's no surprises in the same way, right? So I'd say around 60 to 70 hours a week is quite normal. It is still more than your average work, but they do get paid fairly well. I'd say around 85,000 as the base salary, just like investment banking, but the bonus is typically slightly less, even though it can still reach 100,000 plus. As for the skills required, it is quite technical, so you do need a good knowledge of statistics, economics, finance and accounting, and other things like that. It is also important to know how to write, as you can obviously see by the reports that I showed you earlier. And in addition to that, people are typically somewhat knowledgeable with some programming languages, like what might be SQL or VBA too. Also, the CFA, which is short for Chartered Financial Analyst, is a common designation for equity research as well. And I'll leave this article going over a day in the life in equity research as well if you're interested. So this brings us to our final path, which is financial audit. And that's basically got to do with verifying the accuracy of the financial statements of a company. So it's really about investigating whether there's potentially any errors or even fraud somewhere in there. This can either be in the form of an internal auditor or an external auditor. Internal auditor basically means that you're employed by the company that you audit. So for example, I could be employed by Coca-Cola and I'd be auditing Coca-Cola's financial statements internally, right? And then on the other hand, you have external auditors, which are typically the big four. You've probably already heard of them. And you go around auditing different companies out there. So typically you might spend, say, 2 to 3 weeks in a particular company auditing their accounts and then move on to the next company and so on and so forth. It's actually what I did myself for a summer at PwC, for instance. Also, while at the job, auditors do work towards a designation known as the CPA, which stands for the Certified Public Accountant in the US at least. And usually, as for the work hours, it's typically around 60 hours a week, something along those lines. It does peak, it does go slightly higher in the winter months, which is basically when the companies are closing all of their accounts. So it does get slightly busier, obviously. As for the pay, I'd say it's around 60 to 70,000 US dollars a year in the big financial cities. And then lastly, looking at the skill set, this mainly has to do with obviously finance and accounting, and then some Excel work, even though that's not that heavy on that end, as well as some more presentation and other skills like that, especially as you move further down the road. So those are the 5. I do realize that there's a ton of other finance roles out there which I'd like to cover at some point, maybe in a part 2 if this video does well, so make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Do comment down below if there's any particular position that you'd like me to cover though. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.